The hum of voices filled the Olympic Village Medical Center, where Dr. Evelyn Clark moved with the quiet efficiency that had come to define her over the years. Despite the lively buzz of athletes from all corners of the world, Evie kept her focus on her work, checking temperatures, wrapping sprained ankles, and offering kind but firm advice to overzealous competitors. Yet beneath her calm exterior, memories flickered, unwelcome and persistent. She had long ago buried thoughts of William Thompson, the boy from her childhood who once filled her heart with dreams of a shared future. That was before the war tore through everything, leaving devastation in its wake. Letters between them became infrequent as the battles dragged on, and eventually, they stopped altogether. Evie had convinced herself that part of her life was over, lost in the rubble and ruins of war. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. The door to the clinic swung open, and in walked a tall, broad-shouldered figure. He had the same dark hair, though shorter now, and the same intense green eyes that she used to get lost in. For a moment, Evie thought she was seeing a ghost. "Evie." His voice was deeper than she remembered, but there was no mistaking it. "Is that really you?" She stood frozen, her heart thudding against her chest. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, though a flicker of uncertainty passed through his eyes. "I'm competing for Team GB. I pulled a muscle during training, and they sent me here for a checkup. I never imagined I'd run into you." Evie's hands were steady as she led him to an examination table, but inside, she was anything but. "It's been a long time," she said quietly, avoiding his gaze as she checked his injury. "Too long," he replied softly. The atmosphere between them was heavy with words left unsaid, with memories unspoken. She could feel the questions brimming beneath the surface, the ones she didn't dare ask. Why hadn't he written? Why did everything fall apart? But she held back. This was her job, after all, and professionalism came first. Will broke the silence. "You look different, but the same somehow. I mean, you've grown up, but you're still Evie." She glanced up, meeting his eyes. "And you're still Will," she replied, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. They spent the next few minutes talking as she treated him, the conversation dipping into polite small talk about the games, the events, and London itself. Yet underneath, there was an undercurrent, a pull neither of them could ignore. After she finished, he lingered for a moment. "There's so much I want to say, Evie. So much I should have said back then." The sadness in his eyes mirrored her own, but she couldn't allow herself to dive into that pain. "Maybe later," she replied, offering him a professional nod as she turned away. Later came faster than either of them expected. That evening, they found themselves at the same event, a celebration in one of London's grand halls. The setting sun cast a golden glow through the large windows, bathing the room in warmth. Athletes mingled with dignitaries, journalists, and volunteers, but all Evie could think about was the man standing across the room, looking at her as though no time had passed at all. He crossed the room and stood before her, nervous but determined. "Walk with me." Evie hesitated but nodded. Together, they slipped out of the hall and into the quiet streets of London. The city still bore the scars of war, but the Olympic spirit had brought a renewed energy, a sense of hope. They strolled along the Thames, past landmarks they had once visited as young dreamers. It was as if the city itself remembered their youthful promises. The tension between them eased as they talked, about what they had done during the war, about the people they had lost, and about how they had changed. "I thought of you so many times," Will said suddenly, stopping by a stone railing overlooking the river. "But everything was chaos. The letters got lost, and before I knew it, years had gone by." Evie leaned against the cool stone, her heart heavy. "I thought you'd forgotten about me, that you moved on." "I could never forget you, Evie." His voice was raw, filled with the sincerity that had always been his hallmark. The war changed everything, but it never changed how I felt about you. She closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. It changed me too, Will. I'm not the same girl I was back then. I've seen too much, done too much. We've both been through hell. I know, he said gently. But that doesn't mean we can't find something new, something better, together. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The past and the present collided, and all the barriers she had built around her heart began to crumble. It wasn't easy to let go of the hurt, the disappointment, but here was the man she had once loved, standing before her with the same hope in his eyes she used to see. Do you really think we can just pick up where we left off? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. No, he replied, taking a step closer. We can't pick up where we left off, but we can start from here, from now. It won't be easy, but I want to try. Evie searched his face, seeing not just the boy she once knew but the man he had become, stronger, more resilient, and wiser. And perhaps she had become that way too. I've missed you, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Will's expression softened, and he reached out, taking her hand in his. Then let's not waste any more time. Their first kiss was tentative, filled with all the emotions they had buried for years. It was a kiss of rediscovery, of new beginnings in a world that had almost been destroyed. As they pulled apart, they both smiled, real, genuine smiles that reached their eyes. In the days that followed, they spent every spare moment together, exploring a city that had changed yet somehow remained the same. They wandered through parks, laughed in small cafes, and found themselves talking late into the night about their dreams, their fears, and everything in between. The connection they once had blossomed into something deeper, something forged by shared loss and the understanding that life was too short to let love slip away. One afternoon, they visited a war memorial tucked away in a quiet corner of London. Names of the fallen were etched into stone, a stark reminder of those they had lost. Will's gaze lingered on a few names, and Evie could see the tension in his jaw. I served with some of them, he said quietly. Good men gone too soon. Evie slipped her hand into his, offering silent comfort. I worked in field hospitals during the war, she said. It was hard, watching so many lives slip away. But somehow, we're still here. He turned to her, his eyes filled with gratitude. And that's why I don't want to waste another second. We've been given a second chance, and I'm not going to let it slip through our fingers. Evie felt a warmth spread through her chest. For so long, she had been afraid to hope, to believe in happiness again. But with Will by her side, the future felt brighter, more promising. As the Olympic Games reached their climax, Will found himself on the track, ready for the race he had trained so hard for. Evie watched from the stands, her heart pounding in time with the athlete's footsteps. She knew how much this meant to him, not just as a competitor, but as a man who had fought his way back from the darkness of war. When the starting pistol fired, Will surged forward, his body a blur of motion. Evie held her breath, her hands clenched into fists. She had seen him at his lowest, struggling with doubt and uncertainty, but now he was in his element, strong, determined, and full of life. The race was over in seconds, but those seconds felt like a lifetime. Will crossed the finish line with a triumphant smile, and Evie's heart soared. It wasn't about winning a medal, it was about reclaiming a sense of purpose, of joy, in a world that had been shattered. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they met near the river once more. The city lights reflected on the water, casting a soft glow around them. What happens next? She asked, her voice soft as she leaned into him. We take it one day at a time, Will replied, wrapping an arm around her. We've been given a second chance, and I'm not going to let it slip away. Evie looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with tears, but this time, they were tears of happiness. Neither am I. They stood there for a long moment, holding on to each other as the world moved on around them. The war had taken much from them, but it hadn't taken their hope, their ability to love, or the strength to start again. In the weeks that followed, they began to plan a future together. Evie would continue her medical work, and Will would explore opportunities to mentor younger athletes. They spoke of small things, finding a little flat in London, perhaps a trip to the countryside. The simplicity of their plans was a balm after years of chaos. One evening, while sitting in a quiet cafe, Will reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn box. Evie's breath caught in her throat as he opened it, revealing a delicate ring with a single pearl. "This was my mother's," he said softly. "I've carried it with me through everything. I always hoped I'd be able to give it to you." Tears welled in Evie's eyes as she looked at him, unable to speak. The war had taken so much, but it hadn't taken this moment, this love that had endured despite everything. "Will," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Marry me, Evie," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "Let's build something beautiful out of everything we've survived." She nodded, unable to hold back her tears. "Yes, Will. Yes." Their kiss was filled with all the love, hope, and promise of a future they had once thought lost. As they held each other close, the world outside seemed distant, the pain of the past giving way to the joy of the present. The 1948 Olympics had brought people together from all corners of the globe, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. For Evie and Will, it was a chance to reclaim what they had lost, a love rekindled in a city healing from the scars of war. As they walked hand in hand through the quiet streets of London, the future stretched out before them, full of possibilities. They had learned that love wasn't about perfection or fairy tales. It was about finding each other again, even after all the world had thrown at them, and choosing to hold on, no matter what lay ahead.